Hey guys, it's Syama here from Scaling Retail for another episode of Retailing Weekly. Super excited. So many cool things that have been happening in the news, lots of interesting things that are obviously impacting the worlds of retail. And today we're going to be talking all about them in a sweet, short segment that's going to hopefully be a little bit inspiring. I think there are some really cool innovations and things that are happening, and possibly also a little frustrating as we hear some more cynical perspectives from different outlets across our retail landscape. So the first thing that I wanted to chat about was something a bit on the downer side. The New York Times recently published an article about if the fashion wearables love affair is really over. And so I think it's something to really ask ourselves, what does it mean to have fashion technology, and how important is fashion technology as far as what we think about fashion? And so what I think is important to understand here is that a lot of different retail brands, a lot of different luxury brands have been entering into the wearable tech space, right? We saw Louis Vuitton enter into the space. We saw Hermes enter the space. We're talking specifically about smartwatches and trying to get into that wearable tech space. Companies like Ringly have also tried to have their own approach to kind of the Fitbit and like reminder bracelet services. And then certainly, guys, we saw brands like Hussein Chalayan, who really, I think, took to the forefront what wearable tech is and said, hey, what if we had a dress where you pressed a button and the bottom of the dress would come up? And so certainly those things are a little bit more sci-fi, futuristic, can be considered somewhat dystopic depending on your perspective of technology and singularity and what it might mean in the future. But as far as where wearable technology is going, I think what we're going to find is that it's actually going to be more subversive as far as how we find it in our products, right? I think technology is actually going to be adding a tremendous amount of value to the products that we are going to be seeing on the market, even if they're not necessarily going to be so technology focused, right? So when we think about wearable tech, we oftentimes think about things like, the smart watches, things like, is this gonna, press the button, that kind of stuff. But I think what we're going to start to find are technologies that are really helping us to find better fabrications, technologies that are actually able to help us perform a little bit smarter. So think about things like handbags, right? You may not be necessarily wearing it as a physical article of clothing, but imagine if your handbag was a little bit smarter. Imagine if it could, redistribute the weight, let's say, depending on, how heavy the product was in your bag, right? Imagine it could get a little bit stronger, if it could toughen up the fabric in order to provide you some more support. Or imagine if, standpoint, you were able to pay, like Apple Pay, but you had a card that was attached to your bag, or different things like that. So I think as far as the future of wearable technology, I don't quite agree with the New York Times that it's over or that it's something we have to say goodbye to. But I do think as far as technology really start to incorporate into fashion, I think we're going to see it take on so many cooler, more useful ways. Personally, I never really saw that wearable tech was very, very helpful. I mean, smartwatches are one thing, but do I need my clothes to provide some utility for me? Well, if it works, which is great. But the fabrics are great, right? So think about like water repellent fabrics that have become so much more refined over time. Think about, ways in which the technology with manufacturing has really, increased over time. Those, I think, are great technological advancements that consumers may or may not be interested in knowing about, depending on what your brand strategy is. But I'd say, guys, wearable tech, not over yet, right? That is something we definitely want to spend some time focusing on. As far as how it's going to end up looking out for this year and kind of where things are headed. So the next thing I thought was interesting was Women's Wear Daily did a write-up on the of pop-up shops. And so one of the things that I think is so important about understanding pop-up shops are that pop-up shops can be great tools for brands. They can also be very expensive marketing opportunities that may not necessarily yield into some great ROIs. And so it used to be back in the day, right? Instead of calling it a pop-up shop, but it was just experiential marketing. And I think that experiential marketing really kind of led the way with all these empty storefronts, really led the way for kind of where pop-up shops are today. So I think that, pop-up shops really have been rooted in experiential marketing for, I want to say at least 15 to 20 years, as far as creating experience and getting people to come and giving them a taste of the product, getting them to see the brand and walk into the world of the brand. So I think, guys, it is really important to think about pop-up shops as not only, number one, testing grounds for where you think you might want to open up a flagship store. Obviously, we know great direct-to-consumer brands are going flagship, right? They do want to have physical brick and mortar footprints. The other thing pop-up shops are great for is to build brand awareness on a local and national scale. So that means certainly being able to take your messaging on the ground. Digital marketing is so expensive and can be so difficult to get people's attention, especially when you're so focused on cost per clicks and you're a small to medium-sized business and maybe you don't have the right budgets to do digital in more meaningful, impactful ways as far as online advertising buys. However, if you do focus your efforts on more smaller activations that might have bigger roots in terms of community involvement or partnering with different people, then something like a pop-up shop can be really great as far as getting that word of mouth, really propelling your press forward and being able to say, hey, this is what we stand for. Welcome to our world, right? Experiential is definitely where we're seeing things heading to the future. Done properly, pop-up shops can be quite expensive. So as you guys start to think about, where the pop-up shop markets are for you, I would say, think about what that budget looks like, going into this year and next year. What are the different areas and ways in which you can experiment with something like this? Again, the cons are, it's a bit of a shot in the dark, right? So many people are doing pop-up shops. Can you really get the market's attention? If you can execute it properly, think about what you want it to do for you, right? What is kind of the purpose of it? Next really interesting article was originally published on Glossy by their parent company, Digiday. This is all about Off-White, Virgil Abloh, and coming out with his For All collection, which is a diffusion line. Now, when was the last time you guys heard about diffusion lines, right? Diffusion lines, or most likely you think about things like Calvin Klein and coming out with CK and coming out with, all the different kind of, underwear lines, all the different products under Calvin, DKNY also, right? Parent company, Donna Karan, came out with all these different diffusions. Even, guys, back in the day, Gucci in the 80s, and all these licensing, right? It was like Gucci accessories and Gucci this. And while they weren't necessarily diffusion lines straight from the parent company, they were definitely other product extensions that allowed you to incorporate the brand into your lifestyle without having to pay that hefty price tag. So Virgil has made a new attempt into really tapping into the line market. And what's so interesting about this is he's going about it in a different way than a lot of the other traditional retailers have been working on. So for example, back in the heyday when Target first launched their first collaborations, I remember waiting in line at the opening ceremony store in New York to get a Parenza Schuler, something or other. It's like a top or a cardigan or something to really attach myself to this brand because it was so new that these collaborations were happening, right? And then obviously we saw the rollout of H&M doing collaborations, and all of a sudden diffusion became a high-low collaboration. It was like, let's take these bigger brands, let's pair them up with more mass market distribution points and create something that's going to be, cheaper, but has that aesthetic. Now, what the Off-White team has done very successfully in their For All collection is they're really limiting the distribution and they're making it accessible to really just their brand followers, to their brand loyalists. And because they're doing so, it's going to be a lot better of a fit in terms of how the market responds to it, because it's not going to become oversaturated. They're still going to be following the models of limited distribution as they do with their regular collections. They're still going to be hyping it up as they do with their regular collections. And they're also going to be the amount of time and the product, right? So what's amazing about this is they're treating it as if it was just a part of the regular collection in terms of their strategy and approach to it. It's not like, hey, we're just going to introduce this line and kind of secretly bring it in, not tell anyone about it and see how it goes. They're making it a thing, right? And the reason why they've been able to do so is because their brand is already quite established. Now, when I see a lot of small businesses that are launching and they want to quickly kind of have a higher end line, they want to have a diffusion line, a lower price point line. They want to move into different categories. One of the biggest issues is really being able to say, establish first, right? What do we want to be known for first? Then once you establish that, you create the brand presence, then you can start to think about moving into these other different categories and also diffusion lines. So I think Virgil's done an amazing job with launching this new strategy. I think it'll be great to see over time, how many collections are going to be released under the For All collection. How does that really impact sales over time? What does the resale market look like for these products? Because another thing that's interesting is the resale industry is becoming so big, right? We saw the RealReal partner up with Stella McCartney to do some reselling, to really kind of lock in what that process looks like as far as the resale market of their items. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the reselling market also responds for the For All product, right? We saw with a lot of the big collaborations with H&M and Target, reselling of these items actually became a lot higher because they were such limited edition exclusive products. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch out for. Also, to be able to see as time goes on, how many collections of these they do, does it cannibalize their full price business? And how are they really going to be executing that in terms of advertising? So anyway, guys, lots of interesting stuff happening behind the scenes over there. If you are interested in the For All product, it is going to be sold online, and it's going to be sold at their direct retail stores. And so it is going to be, sold in these seasonal drops. And I think that it is, really important to understand. And I think Glossy did a great job of highlighting this, that Alpo could easily have partnered up with big retailers and done a mass distribution, but he is looking to do something that's far more niche, and he's looking to really build that brand awareness and offer something really special. This kind of also reminds me of how Kanye West did his initiative with his last collection, where he just bypassed the entire fashion show and trade show markets and just went, boom, we're going to go straight to paparazzi in order to get our products shown and start to get pressed. So we're starting to see some really interesting ways of going to market without necessarily traditional channels that have been used in the past. All right, guys. Next up, I think what's really cool here is Wired Magazine. We don't oftentimes cite them, but they were talking about 6 ways that new technology will revolutionize shopping. Now, what I think is really funny here about how we think about shopping and technology around shopping, the biggest thing that I think is going to be helping the retailers out there today is going to be storage that allows you to pay as you go. The company called Stoga is going to be launching an Airbnb for warehouse space. I think that's really fascinating. Basically, it allows you to rent space as you need. So a lot of you guys out there who are medium-sized companies, you're growing your businesses and you're wondering how you're going to be able to scale up back-end operations in order to really meet your future consumer demand. Companies like Stoga are going to be really integral and helpful for you as you start to enter into that space. Other things that I think are really interesting to think about here are kind of where shopping centers are going to be heading. And so I reported on this a little while ago, obviously Alibaba is doing a lot in terms of they bought a retail mall. They're starting to look at different ways of integrating grocery store shopping, similar to what Amazon was doing with the Amazon kind of grocery store checkout processes and their flagships. And I think what we're going to start to find is spaces become far more experiential based, and they become really based on customer cohorts, right? It's really based on how we're going to be mapping out the technology experience, the lifestyle experience, and integrating a lot of the newer technologies that have been launching into integrative retail solutions in retail malls. Retail malls are not dying. Retail malls are going to be evolving, right? Now, the next thing that I think is interesting here is how consumers are going to be actually involved in buying product. Meaning, how are they going to be, purchasing at the checkout gate? How easy are going to be their returns, right? So I think we're going to start to find that more and more payment solution gateways return gateways, all of these different processes in which we can get the customer to really integrate with our systems are going to be a lot easier. So for example, amazing retailers that don't accept Apple Pay are missing out on business both online and in store, meaning they're not able to have that ease of checkout. This decreases the amount of time you spend checking out either online, decreases the amount of time you might be spending checking out in store. Small integrations like that are really important. Integrating better shipping solutions. So I personally really like that company, Navar. They do a great job of creating really great visual mapping so customers can see where the products are in the process. I think integrating those kinds of things are going to be really essential so customers have a little bit more visibility and control over where the shipping process happens, right? What platforms they're shipping on, what address they're shipping to, and integrating that with their existing catalogs in terms of their contact fields. Are they sending a gift? Do you want to upload your contacts, etc.? I think stuff like that is going to be so amazing and so synergistic. And then the other thing that I think is super cool here is being able to, recognize the technology behind our shipping. And so when I think about that, I think about things like, how amazing Amazon has been really recently as far as introducing an increasingly more amount of their Prime subscribers, also increasing the availability of their next day inventory. So what products can be shipped and sent next day. I think for medium-sized retailers and small retailers to be able to keep up with those phenomenons, we need to be looking at local same-day shipping as far as being able to tap into your local community. We also need to be able to look into things like, where we are going to be, how we're going to be integrating that in terms of, I would say maybe something more like control. So like maybe it's not necessarily introducing the drone technologies, maybe it's introducing like local couriers, maybe it's also looking at things like Ship, SHYP. I'm trying to think here, like how can we really start to integrate the shipping process? I do like what UPS has done with their local drop-off points, but what I don't think like that Amazon has done with the Amazon lockers, I don't think that's been quite successful. So anyway, guys, more to come, right, on what's happening with shipping. But I think that's something really interesting for us to kind of consider as we start to move forward, right? And as we start to see the future of consumer demands and how we start to meet them. Now, lastly, guys, super cool article that I was reading about also on Glossy. It was talking about this collaboration between the CFDA and 19th Amendment. And for those of you guys who don't know, 19th Amendment is a great online platform that allows you to connect with a lot of small emerging market brands, and they actually hold a lot of the manufacturing processes on the back end. They have connections with suppliers, they have connections with manufacturing, and basically you can pre-order products from designers through a platform like 19th Amendment, put a pre-sale number down, pay for it, they ship the product, they make it custom in some cases, or they make it upon the delivery schedule for these smaller brands. And the CFDA is looking to really close the loop on the supply chain as far as more of the see now, buy now technology rollout. So we saw really last year, Rebecca Minkoff did a huge see now, buy now. Tommy Hilfiger was doing see now, buy now. Ralph Lauren also did it. But now we're wondering, how do we actually scale that out? What does that really mean? And so what I think is really interesting here is brands like Calvin Klein are partnering up with the CFDA, and other different designers are going to be using that 19th Amendment backend. They are going to be also opening up their distribution in terms of who they're now going to be marketing to. And the CFDA is going to be introducing different manufacturers and sourcing agents to 19th Amendment to open up their back end. So 19th Amendment, really I started to notice come on the more major market scene with Macy's. I had a partnership a few years ago with Macy's.com where they were introducing a lot of smaller market brands. I didn't think it was that successful. It didn't get a lot of hype. It didn't get a lot of play, though it is an amazing marker of how these big kind of partnership deals can really start to add visibility and diversification to an assortment, right? So I thought it was really cool that they had done that. I think now opening up the CFDA, I think it's going to have a lot more edge. I think it's going to be a lot more interesting. And I think what we're going to find is that the CFDA is going to add a lot of more heavyweight designers to the 19th Amendment collaboration, which is going to really increase their brand visibility and hopefully get them a lot more traffic, press, and hopefully more business. All right, guys, that's it from me. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Retailing Weekly. I'll see you guys later. Bye.